One thing that has come out of the government shutdown that nobody is talking about is the lack of the release of governmental data, which means inflation numbers, job numbers, all of those are magically not going to come out, all while we have inflation running rampant. Today, I'm going to dive in how grocery prices have absolutely skyrocketed in flight, hitting crazy all time highs for a family of four, and why inflation is not over, transitory, and how we might be in an area of governmental stagflation. We're going to get into all this, but first, let's of course dive in to the grocery bills that we are seeing absolutely shoot up for people over the last few years, especially an average family of four. It's now up to a cost of $1,030 a month. This is a $280 increase from January 2017, where the average family spent just $750 a month. To put this differently, this is now up from $9,000 a year to $12,367 or $360, which is a 37% increase over those 8 years. So we are definitely in a affordability crisis where we have people that are unable to afford homes, now potentially getting strained to buy groceries, which is absolutely heartbreaking. And now we are also seeing that Warren Buffett and others have been calling out for this. And we are also seeing the fear and greed index. This is what I wanted to bring up, how everybody is in extreme fear of the overall market. But if you really take a step back and look, the most recent inflation numbers in the United States showed a 3% year over year, a 0.3% increase. And this was higher in the year over year average than in August, where we saw 2.9%. But like I touched on the intro, the White House says October jobs inflation data may never be released. So why? Of course, we had that government shutdown, but this is important data which allegedly helps Jerome Powell and company and the Federal Reserve make very important decisions like whether or not they're going to cut interest rates. So now magically, we don't have that data, which is backward looking. And now the Fed is going to need to make another decision. So will this be pushed by now President Trump, who's going to say, hey, I want low interest rates? Is this something that Jerome Powell is going to bend the knee to over time? Because we don't have the data. Of course, they've been a data-driven Federal Reserve, but now we're wondering, without that data, what is the Fed going to do? So the Democratic shutdown made it extraordinarily difficult. And so although the Democrats do not want a healthy economy because they want to have their power in place next year, well, it's a Democratic shutdown that might actually let Trump get his way, which is very interesting. So these economic reports, they have permanently damaged the system with the October CPI and the jobs reports never being released. It'll be permanently impaired, leaving our policymakers at the Fed flying blind for a critical period, which is very interesting. But like I said, right, we've had that 3% year over year data. And if you look at these inflation rates, well, these inflation rates have been going up since Donald Trump has been in office. Of course, that is not all just because of his policies. Everybody's blaming tariffs and what have you. But if you look, right, when Trump first got into office, it was going down significantly. And it just recently started going up. And that's probably because of the policies that Biden and company made late term, right? We usually see the layover effects of this, of policies 6 to 12 months after. And of course, these tariffs were starting to be put into place in May. So maybe, just maybe, we'll start to see some of these effects in November CPI term, maybe early next year. But granted, when we don't see those October numbers, the month-over-month numbers are going to be a little bit different. But this is beside the point, right? When we're seeing things like the overall inflation numbers of just the grocery bills, now you have to ask, right? Will the average United States citizen, are they doing better or worse than they were doing just a year ago. Now, it's very continue all of this and start to see how the overall United States government is going to operate here going forward, because now this is the second term that Trump's been in, and there's been a shutdown in both of them, right? So both these shutdowns and all of this leads the question, how is inflation in the overall government doing? And I've been asking the question a bunch on this channel, so make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button for me. But are we in a quote unquote stagflation? Because this area looks a lot similar to the 1970s. Now, Google's AI says no, we are not in stagflation, but there's increased risk that it could move in that direction. Now, before we have people essentially putting us in that box, I always like to be a little bit more forward looking than a lot of these articles, because, hey, this is why you guys come to the Macro Insights channel, because I'm looking at these things and kind of dissecting. But for those that need a little refresher to the 1970s, it's when you had massive amounts of inflation, but you had an economic boom. Now, with AI and the Mag 7 and the way that we're seeing all of these companies operate, it leads the question, okay, well, are we starting to see, the economy really start to take off? And I honestly think that yes, we are going to see an AI boom. Now, are we in somewhat of a bubble? Maybe there are some companies that are looking like a bubble, but overall, I think that the United States is going to benefit from AI, because we're going to start to see a lot of people move away from actually having to work those 40 hours a week, because people are going to become more efficient. We're already seeing it in the marketplace. The younger white males just graduating from college are actually getting hired at the lowest rate in history, which is staggering, especially because we're not in a recession. But it's all because the middle management, they're getting way more efficient with AI. So they don't need to have, these $60,000 to $80,000 jobs. So it's interesting. What's going to happen with the next job market? How are people going to continue pushing forward with that? It's going to be interesting the way this plays out, especially when we're going to be looking at this, right? Are we going to be cutting interest rates in the next 25-ish days? And this is the first time that I'm seeing, since I started doing these with you guys, that we're actually looking like we're not going to cut interest rates. It's more likely than not. It's a 55.6% chance that we aren't going to cut interest rates, where it's a 44.4% chance that we will. So it's still close, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I think it is interesting that now we're seeing the CME group actually show that, hey, this is a real possibility that we don't cut interest rates in December because of what we are seeing, because we don't have that data. And when we look at the Dixie, without that data, all of a sudden the Dixie is doing not too shabby with 99.27. We're floating just under that 100 mark. Hopefully we could get up there in the near future. But as we all know, the S&P 500 has been absolutely crushing it. Granted, we haven't stepped foot over that 6,900. We've been at 6,800. We have a little bit of a dip here in the last 5 days. But I do think that the way that the overall market has just shifted and the market sentiment, well, everybody is looking extremely bullish. And because they're extremely bullish, well, hell, that just means that everybody's fleeing away from the dollar. We've seen the narrative of the debasement trade. That's actually becoming in, just the straight up, terms here, right? We're starting to see, how these people are really starting to look at the overall stock market, and how people are fleeing away from the dollar and really going into these other assets. So I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. Make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button for me, telling a friend to tell a friend, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.